Hey everyone, welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. In the Mobile User Acquisition Show, we feature interviews with the smartest folks in mobile and growth who share invaluable, actionable, tactical insights on every aspect of mobile growth and marketing, not to mention some adjacent areas just as well. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is presented by me, Shamant Rao, CEO of the mobile growth marketing firm Rocketship HQ, and produced by Karishma Sundaram, our superstar content marketing manager at Rocketship HQ. Each episode includes strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile growth marketing that you can use to unlock tremendous growth for your app in a sustainable and capital efficient manner.
Our guest today is Brett Nowak. Brett is the founder of Liquid and Grit, a product research company for games that creates actionable reports about new game features and industry trends for game developers. Prior to this, Brett spent a big chunk of his career working with some of the biggest gaming studios in the world. Today, we discuss the Zero Meeting Workplace, a system that has provided efficiency, flexibility, and quality of life to employers and employees alike. Brett highlights examples from his own experience in implementing this almost zero meeting culture on his own team. And what's impressive is that he has both maintained and sustained this culture in his team as it has grown to 46 people, showing just what is possible if you just question long held assumptions. Much like we did after our last interview with Brett on hiring, we at Rocketship HQ have implemented a lot of these practices, and now we are a completely asynchronous team spread across the world. This is perhaps a peek into what the future holds for workplaces. There are lessons here for everyone, irrespective of whether you're remote, in office, or somewhere in between.
I'm very excited to welcome back Brett Nowak to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. Brett, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Very excited to have you for so many reasons, including the fact that your first episode was very, very inspiring to myself and so many folks who heard us, just because of the very radical approach you have had to hiring. Certainly that's something I've put to good use because I think I mentioned this, that we are fully distributed. We're now like 12 people, and I still draw on a lot of what you said. And of course, something you said almost in passing the last time we spoke struck me as, again, very unique and intuitive and not something that a lot of people do, which is what we're going to talk about today, that you barely have any meetings. You have almost zero meetings. So the working title of this conversation is the Zero Meeting Workplace. I don't need to elaborate on why that's interesting or intriguing, but let's get into everything about the Zero Meeting Workplace. To start, tell us what inspired you to want to minimize meetings when you started your company.
Well, at first it was a little bit of a necessity because I had a full-time job for almost 2 years when I started Liquid and Grit. So I couldn't have meetings. I was busy working. But then once I was doing it full-time, I realized that not having meetings would reduce switching costs, which was a big component of it because I wanted people to be able to dedicate time to the deep thought work. I wanted to build a system that really scaled, which is the second reason. And not having meetings allows me to scale very easily. And then I wanted us to be able to hire people all over the world. And the no meetings helps with that and allows people to work wherever they want to as well. So if we hire someone, for example, in Portland, which we did for our lead writer, and he now lives in Spain and wants to live in Spain, that's totally fine. And then the fourth is probably to reduce bias in the workplace, but more so to make better decisions, because I felt like meetings were a place that was full of bias, where you'd have somebody, for example, who was a very strong verbal negotiator or very authoritative or very loud, or for whatever other reason was good at meetings. And those people ended up driving a lot of the decisions, but I never felt like that was a correlation to having great ideas. I mean, they can have great ideas, but a lot of times the quiet person in the back of the room has great ideas too. And I felt like if I eliminated meetings, I would produce better decisions.
Yeah, yeah, right. And there's a lot that we can unpack, but I think what struck me as interesting was how you spoke about the bias. And I agree. I think in a lot of conventional workplaces that I have been in, people who are good at meetings end up having a lot of clout. And there is a lot of conventional workplaces favor that. This also reminds me of what you said about hiring in our last conversation, which is that, look, a lot of conventional hiring methods filter for people who are good at interviews, not necessarily those who are the best employees. I think this is very analogous that you end up favoring people who are good at meetings, not necessarily those with the best ideas. You also said you wanted to build a system that scales. I'm curious about that aspect, and I definitely want to drill down a little bit deeper because a lot of folks would think, look, if you're a small team, it's just a lot easier to do without meetings. If it's just you and 2 or 3 people on your team or contractors, you can just say, hey, just email me, just Slack me or whatever. But as the team grows, as a company grows, more people need to talk, not just to you, but also to each other. So in theory, it should be harder to sustain a no meeting culture as a company grows. Now you have 46 people, if I'm not wrong. So your company grew from you having this as a side hustle and 1 employee to 46 people. So I would love to hear more about how you saw the no meeting culture. And specifically, was there a trigger point when you felt like, okay, I can sustain this not just when I have a full-time job and I'm forced to have no meetings, but I can even sustain this with a 46-person team, not just like a small, intimate team that is just easier.
Well, one of the things I saw with working at some smaller companies is that they would make that assumption of we'll do it later. And then when they got to that size, it was extremely difficult and sometimes almost to their detriment when they had to change their culture, because changing culture is extremely difficult, even when you're 100% owner like I am. And so I really was very intense about having a culture and a system that worked for scale. And I thought about it, how is it going to work for 100 people? How is it going to work for 1,000 people? Because I didn't want to have to change it later on, to the point where I would tell people that email is too long or that comment is too long. And it was only a few paragraphs. And this also somewhat interacts with what I thought about in terms of the process. And I don't know if this exactly answers the question, but I had a pretty profound reaction to the movie The Founder, which is the story of the founding of McDonald's. And what they did, in at least in this movie, but it makes sense that they did do this, is they basically operationalized a system that most people didn't think was operationalizable. So before McDonald's, making a burger was an unorganized system of 3, maybe 2 people doing the whole process. And what the original founders did was they operationalized a lot of it, leveraging humans for the most important part of the process. So it wasn't like they operationalized the entire process. And I realized that other companies have done very well, like Starbucks is another example, and Toyota is a third. And I thought if I could think like that with our process, which doesn't seem like it could be standardized, I could reduce costs, maintain quality, shorten delivery times, and improve the system and scale it. It would be incredibly valuable to me. And so I started to do that piece by piece. And I think when I tell people this, they go, well, we couldn't do that. And I think that's because they think of their entire system and then they say, well, we can't. And I think this is somewhat of an American mentality, but maybe I'm incorrect in that. We can't operationalize the whole thing. And that's not the solution. The solution is operationalizing parts of the process where humans aren't really adding a lot of value, right? Like humans are incredibly valuable and skilled and parts of the process, but you want them to be focusing all of their time on that really valuable part of the process. And what we do is try to make those other parts of the process be as little as possible or be outsourced by technology or other things that don't really require human capacity, human skills. So it ties into no meetings in that a meeting is something that shouldn't ideally be done multiple times if it's about something that we're going to do often. And also, typically, the process of having that meeting or the thing that comes up during that meeting should be something that eventually we should try to replace with a process or an outline or a comment on a doc. And the other thing that it all connects to is that the switching costs is a big part of it.
You talked about how a company that starts out with a lot of meetings just finds it hard to change, right? So for you, when you were starting out, what were some of the things you did to ensure meetings were minimal?
Well, the first is it has to start from the top. And I think that's actually pretty easy to control because most meetings are kicked off by managers or execs because meetings are easy ways to get information. So managers are likely to do it. But if you're the owner of a company like I am, and you're also the manager, then having all your employees and workers stop what they're doing and explain to you something that's probably trivial for them to explain to you is pretty costly. So first is I just made it a point that the no meeting culture was coming from the top. I wasn't scheduling any meetings with people. The second that I mentioned is I was pretty diligent about calling these things out, almost to an awkward extent, where they probably were thinking, listen, guy, I only send you 2 emails a week and you're telling me it's too long. But I was pretty much like, well, this is going to scale, I hope. And if I get 20 of these emails a week, that's going to be very expensive. That's going to be 3, 4, 5 hours of my time. And I don't really believe that we have 40 hours in a work week. I think you get about maybe 20 of quality hours, and they're very, very valuable. And if you waste them on things like that, then that's not good. The other thing is we found alternatives. So Loom was a good example. We'll record ourselves going over something if we need to talk it through. And the other is that we have a lot of things written down. So we have our operating procedures for a lot of different areas of our company written down, and we started building those over time. So we just kind of like got after each little thing. We just chip away, chip away, chip away. And I think people, they hear this like, again, they couldn't possibly do this. We'd have to sit down for weeks. And that's not what we did. We had to make money to live. But as we went, we just chipped away on it so that we had everything written down and we had our operating procedures written down. We have a whole communication outlines and what all the tools, how you're supposed to communicate.
Yeah, I think oftentimes when a lot of people hear about operationalizing stuff, it's like, it's just too much. I think something that's also worked for us is just to chip away small bits, just like if you do something twice, just codify it, put that in an SOP. I think that's definitely a useful point if it fits.
The one other thing I want to add is that I think when people hear me say it, the other thing they say is, well, you wanted a lifestyle business, Brett. And I mean, I don't really know how to interpret that. I mean, I've worked very hard. I'm very disciplined. I think everyone works to have some type of lifestyle. We work somewhat to live, right? I think the important thing I want to say is that the more you can do this, the more money you end up making, because it allows you to have time for more things and newer things, right? So it's that you're basically taking a task that's of low value, operationalizing it so that you as the CEO, founder, leader, manager don't do that task anymore. And that frees you up to do other tasks. And your time is extremely valuable. Your lead's time is extremely valuable. So by saving yourself an hour a week all year, you've just added 50 hours of work time per year. That's a lot of time. That's an extra, I think, 2 weeks of work. So if you continue to do that over time, it can be incredibly valuable. You make more money when you do it. Let's just put it that way.
Sure. If all you did was take the hourly rate of an exec or a leader's time and did the math, that would be staggering, right? Just the amount of time that tends to go away in somewhat not necessary meetings and conversations. Something you also said earlier, Brett, that in most companies, the meetings are called by people that are higher up because they want information, right? And you did say, hey, something you do is to codify a lot of these operational stuff. But can you give us examples about how some of this communication happens? In a conventional company, they might use a meeting. How might that communication happen on your team? Are there any examples that come to mind?
What we typically do is we'll project management anything in a Dropbox paper. And this was another thing about meetings I don't like, is that I always want to have the product or the thing that's making the company money to be the primary object and communication to be secondary and supportive of getting that object done. And I know people go, well, you're not a gaming company or whatever. That's the other counter that everyone has. But I think the same thing would hold true to a gaming company. It's the spec that's creating the game that's going to be seen by the users who are going to end up spending money on the game and making money, right? And what Slack and email and meetings do is they put communication as the primary thing, which is us talking, and the thing that's making us money is secondary. So we always have something that's primary that's going to make the company money. And we use Dropbox paper a lot. That's because it's very flexible. It allows us to have a lot of control over it. Most of the technology we use is very flexible, and we'll build a lot of our own stuff internally, custom, basically. Like we built our own CRM through some tools as well. You can add comments very easily. So we'll basically outline the project. So let's say I'm doing a custom work project, or we're doing a report. We'll outline it, who's on the project, what's the goal of the project, when's the project due, what are the tasks, who are owning the tasks. And then if we have any questions about it, we comment on those tasks, or we comment on that section. And if it's kind of an elaborate project, I may do, or the lead may do, a Loom recording of themselves talking about what they want, or what they're seeing, or what the client said, or what this report's going to be about. And then people can comment on that and resolve it once it's done. And me as a manager, if I don't know what's going on with the project, instead of calling a meeting and interrupting my entire team, which is extremely costly, I can jump into the Dropbox paper and I can ask a question. Hey, how is this going? When do you think this is going to be done? Can I check it out? And all the documents are in there as well, so I can open up and look at it. And the nice thing about that is because there's such low switching costs, right? Like when my team is done with their project, they can respond to me. So they don't stop their work to respond to me. They respond to me when they're done with their work and are ready to respond. And that's very important in the process because it saves a lot of switching cost time and money. But then we do Google Documents for our outline of the report. And then we use, let's say, Keynote if we're going to do something in a presentation, mostly because of the communication of these tools and the real-time adjustments, and then also some of the back-end saving of tech. But that's generally how we do it.
If you will ask folks that are skeptical about some of these approaches to minimal meetings, right? They might say, look, meetings are valuable because they allow discussion, they allow back and forth. Do you think that human interaction, for want of a better phrasing, can get lost with completely asynchronous communication of the sort that you just described?
A little bit, yes, but we have communication back and forth. And I think it's actually more valuable than meetings, right? Because if I speak my opinion about something, I've thought about that in writing and I can edit it and re-edit it and I can form my thoughts clearly. Then the person who is responding can address that in the same fashion when she is ready to respond. And then I can do it. So we're getting very thoughtful responses and interactions, and we are still collaborating on something. It's just asynchronous as opposed to in the moment. And I think in the moment, you're just getting the 1 second prepared comment from somebody and the 1 second prepared comment from someone else. And again, you're getting all the bias that go into it too. It's a man, it's a woman, it's an authoritative person, it's a boss, it's not a boss. And when you remove that, I think you get better reactions. And so I think a lot of these decisions aren't necessarily 100% value, but I think when you weigh the costs and the benefits of it, it's very clear to me, at least, that having much less meetings, like a massive reduction in meetings, is incredibly valuable. The whole spark a moment of innovation is unlikely and very infrequent and not something that can just happen while you're in the same meeting. So I think maybe that's the one plus. The other plus, and this is one of the reasons, is humans like to meet. And the reason they like to meet is because it's easy and it kills a lot of time. And I sort of equate it to people are like, well, why don't you just let them have meetings? And it's like, well, humans like to eat donuts too, right? And if you just let humans and you say like, yeah, just eat donuts, we'll just eat donuts until, bad things are going to happen. And I think as a leader of a company, you have to be a little bit of a lookout for those things and be like, well, yeah, we like to get into meetings and be social and talk about our dog and cat and what happened this weekend. Also, I like that just as everyone else. I'm kind of a chatty Cathy myself. So it's not like I'm sitting here going, I hate meetings. In fact, I like meetings. It's fun to learn about the people in 17 different states in America and 4 different countries. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't make as much money for my company, doesn't make us keep our jobs as much secure if we don't talk about those things. And ultimately, when I weigh those two on a scale, it's not a clear boom, but it is certainly clear to me that we are likely to all keep our jobs, be able to go home to our cats and our dogs and our friends more likely if I don't spend time in a meeting talking about those things. So that's kind of the tough decision that I make as a leader.
Yeah. It's clear, but it's not always easy because it's not instinctive for a lot of folks, right? Especially if you're extroverted, like you said you are. I'm also curious how you think about or approach one-on-ones or career development, which for many companies happens synchronously.
We don't probably solve this problem well in terms of the companies because we just don't really, we're not a company for career progression as much, although people do progress in their careers. It happens really organically at our company. I do think that feedback or anytime you're getting emotional or conversations of career progression are probably a good place where you may want to have a meeting. And that's what's great about our guidelines is our guidelines, not rules. And I think if you're going to have that now, do I think we should have one-on-ones? Absolutely not frequently. I mean, I don't think you need to have these every week like these companies do. So managers can just meet with you and talk about God knows what. But I think every quarter, maybe if you have some leads who want to progress, you can have that conversation. Otherwise, we generally allow it to happen lower tiers. The leads will level up the analysts to seniors, and then I'll level up seniors to leads and leads to directors. So it doesn't happen as frequently. But I would say that this isn't something we've developed as much, but it is probably one of the places I would say a meeting is more valuable.
So you do have a few meetings. So what are some of these meetings that are critical to you? Or what's the structure of these meetings like?
The best instances of meetings for us is something when a more complicated discussion happens about something that's very strategic. If we're going to plan on changing the format of a report, or we're going to release a new report, or we're going to decide to do something pretty large, although that doesn't happen very often. And sometimes that can be replaced with Loom. I think anytime I feel like I'm getting emotional or someone else is getting emotional, which happens fairly infrequently because we have less meetings actually, which is another huge benefit. There's just a lot less of that human bickering and drama because you just don't see people. But anytime I feel like as a leader, I'm frustrated about something, it's either good to have a meeting or it's good to record yourself so that that person understands how important it is to you. And there is an importance to understanding their emotions if they're stressed out or something like that. So I think that's, as a leader, that's when you really want to try to keep your pulse on stuff and be able to kind of identify like this person is bothered, stressed out, or something like that. I should talk to them because you can pick up on emotional cues much better over a meeting.
100% right. And I think with written or asynchronous communication, is just hard to pick up any sort of emotional cues. The tone's just completely unclear. That somebody might be very frustrated and it just wouldn't come across in a Slack chat.
I mean, we just avoid a lot of those because we're not in the same office and we do not meet as much. And I can only attest to our company, but I'm also a very no drama person. Or at least my tolerance for drama is very low. But that said, we have had very few problems. And I think a lot of it because communication is very clear. There's some miscommunication, but it's all documented, right? So often issues come from I said something or believe I said something, you believe I said something else. And ultimately when you have it written down or it's recorded, it's very hard for that to happen unless the person isn't doing their job. And if the person isn't doing their job, then we'll let them go. And so you generally have much clearer alignment between leads and analysts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You had said before that minimal meetings is not an isolated decision, it's part of a larger system. For somebody that's wanting to institutionalize something like this, what are some of the other elements in the system that they might want to be mindful of? Or what do you have in your system for this to be successful?
Well, we obviously hire anybody around the world. Well, pretty much not around the world yet, but most English speaking places. And we hire through tests and we standardize our process. And, we've built the tools to be able to go to remote work. I mean, we've been remote since day one. I think, though, that you probably just need a strong leader because it's something that kind of has to come from the top down because it's not something that humans naturally do on their own. There's really just not a lot of incentive for an employee or a contractor to improve the process of the company because ultimately they're just getting paid based on how well they do the thing that they're doing. Now that's not 100% true. There are people out there who will be so motivated that they'll prove their own process, but generally people don't like change, or humans don't like change. Even I join myself in that bucket. So you have to have a little bit of a heavy-handed leadership to implement change because that's what you're really doing. You're saying, okay, that meeting we had that you guys love talking about your cats and your dog and going over like what you're going to do today, like a scrum that interrupts everybody's workflow and makes you guys all work at the exact same time, we're going to cancel that. And what's going to happen is a bunch of people say, well, but I like that meeting. It's like, yeah, again, it's like you do like that meeting, but you also like to eat donuts. So we're going to scrap it because it's going to allow you to work at 10 to 5 and you to work 2 to 10 or whatever you want to work. For us to hire someone from Spain and Tel Aviv and wherever else. And it's going to be incredibly valuable for the company. And we're sorry. That's the choice that the company's made. And so you kind of have to have that voice, whether it be the leader or someone you've hired to do that job to make this all happen. And I would say, though, again, don't start with a thing that you're going to get that response. Start with a whole bunch of things, ideally, because I personally believe that companies themselves have been looked at now as the social outlet for humans as well. And I just think that that's not something that businesses are supposed to supply. And I think for the most part, it's counter to the success of a lot of companies. And so I think it's very dangerous for companies to go and say, hey, we're going to make it so that you're going to have your social outlet here. And I also think it's bad for the employees in many ways because a lot of them are doing are they're replacing their real friendships and their real families for what they're perceived to be families and friends. And the company is somewhat, I think, being misleading by saying that they are treating them as family. We are not treating people as family because at the end of the day, the company itself has to act objectively about what's best for the company. And to do that, we will let people go if necessary, right? And that's not a family.
And how do you think about sharing or reviewing metrics and progress on key tasks, key projects, which again is something that a lot of conventional companies employ meetings for? How do you think about this?
Well, anecdotally, I was bored out of my mind when I listened to most of these at companies. I mean, the last company had them every week or something. So talk about a costly meeting. You're going to have the entire company on Friday morning at 10 o'clock, sit there and listen to the CEO talk about the company's strategy and the other leads for an hour. And when I looked around the room, 75% of the people were just sitting on Slack trying to get their work done. So the entire company has stopped production to listen to something they're not interested in, and now multitask to actually just get their work done. And they're going to get frustrated because they're not done with their work, and they got to stay there late on Friday. So for that meeting, that was an easy fix for me. And you really start understanding too when you're the founder, like what is really the motivation behind it. A little bit, I think, is just the CEOs wanting to hear their own voice, right? And I try to check my ego at the door. And what we do is we have a document that outlines the projects we're going to review. So if anyone wants to see it at any given time, they can go into that document. And there's some people that really care about that, right? There are people who care about the vision of the company, and there are some people who could care less. And that's totally fine too. They just want to do their job, go home, and they don't want to know where the company's headed. And so for them, they don't check it. And then every quarter I record myself talking through the projects that we're planning on doing for that quarter. Again, anyone can listen to it if they want. They don't have to. And then they can review what's going to happen in the quarter and what we've kind of accomplished in the last quarter. So I generally feel like those type of things are really an opt-in thing that you should not make your whole company do, and you should certainly not stop the production of your entire company to inform them of what you as a CEO have done for last week, because they're not stopping your work. So why would you stop theirs? And most of the time, their work is a lot more valuable than your work.
Yeah, very, very true. And as I think about the entire culture around meetings, a lot of it is unquestioned assumptions. And when you do start to question those assumptions like you just did, you realize how unfounded a lot of these assumptions are. Brett, much like the last time I spoke to you, this has been incredibly instructive. There's changes that I'm going to make literally in the next 20, 30 minutes, right? Again, part of the reason, like I said, I wanted to speak to you was for the purely selfish reason for things I can learn and employ for ourselves. That's certainly happened. But this perhaps is a good place for us to wrap. But before we do that, can you tell folks how they can find out more about you and everything you do?
Well, for Liquid and Grit, you can obviously go liquidandgrit.com and download some of the free resources online. There are full reports there for each of the markets we currently cover. And if you have questions about business stuff, you can reach me on LinkedIn, or you can just email me at brett.novak@liquidandgrit.com. I'm happy to chat about it, although I am very disciplined about my own time. And so I'll probably just send them your way in terms of listening to this podcast.
Yeah, certainly. And you also have a podcast of your own. You want to tell folks about that?
Yeah, we also have a podcast that's very specific to people in mobile gaming who are working on product called Creators at Work. And we talk about product and process of creating mobile games, which you can check out as well.
Excellent. We will link to all of those things in the show notes. And thank you so much for being on the show, Brett.
Thanks for having me.
For more tips, pointers, and strategies from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here, or check out our blog, rocketship.hq.com/blog.